say, okay, are you say you? Okay. So, a couple of things with this. What is the sample size? Yeah. Okay. Now, we're talking about aspiration here. Again, I don't think maybe they mentioned a couple of things about who the people are, but again, who are these people? Okay. Things like age are gonna have a big effect on how you breathe. Okay. Do you have things like asthma? Are you a smoker? Okay. All of that stuff really affects your aspiration. All right. So all that's gonna have an impact on the way that you breathe, and that should be something that you mentioned in here. So they had 10 people. Again, this is probably the people that were sitting in the lab that day. Okay, so they're relatively young, probably going to be, in their 20s somewhere. And they found that, well, with that collection of people, 94% accuracy for user authentication. So it was relatively successful. Okay. Difference in the user's breathing pattern. Okay. Something else was they're saying, well, this thing is robust to particular background noise. All right. So when we say background noise, what are we talking about? Yeah, I mean, what does that mean? Background noise. What's background noise? Yeah, the noise that's in the background. Okay. So what is that? If you're sitting in a quiet room with a fan running, that's background noise. If you're in a mall, right, that's going to be a very different dynamic of background noise. If you're at a sporting concert, a sporting event or a concert, a very different background noise. Okay, so they're saying that, well, it's robust in the reason it's in the face of background noise. Well, what kind of background noise are we talking about? That's something you need to be very specific about. Okay. Why are they doing this? They're saying, well, the more authentication, the better. I think that's a good idea, right? It's a lot of different ways of authenticating ourselves. I would like to have something that was a little bit more competitive than that. Really, they're saying, well, the more authentication is better. To me, that sounds like they're trying to come up with an excuse to get this neat system public. Okay. Again, background look, how they got the idea. This was kind of interesting on how they traced this, how they developed this. Okay. There was a study that was done that was actually analyzing the chemical composition of exhaled breath. So just a person breathing into a spectrometer, the differences in that was enough to actually tell people apart. And say, okay, well, if the chemical composition of our exhaled breath is enough to tell people apart, maybe we can just use the sound of people breathing. Okay, so there's always going to be some kind of connection to the past. Okay, now with this, related work is kind of something else to sort of speculate and analyze. Okay. To me, that kind of seems like a big jump to go from a chemical composition to talk about sounds of somebody's breath. That's just me. Okay. But the truth is, sometimes when you come up with these ideas, you have to link it back to something, and that's just how research works. So when you're attempting to link it back to something, you go to Google and you type in breath differences, and something about mass spectrometry comes up, and you say, hey, we'll use that. Okay, good thing to link back to. Again, weird stuff happens in research, just something to kind of keep in mind. Okay. So how does this work? The user basically breathes into a microphone, and then you analyze the acoustic pattern. You're going to feed that into a classifier, and you will theoretically get enough data to figure out who is who based on just the sound of their breathing. How do they actually test this? Got 10 volunteers, okay, and they called them breathing gestures, okay. I guess I'll call them breathing patterns. That's what they used in the paper. And you had a sniff, which is just 2 really quick inhalations, normal aspiration, and then deep breathing. Okay. Again, when they say deep breathing, that can mean different things to different people. So what do they mean specifically by deep breathing? Okay. And then again, they're saying 10 volunteers. They don't have any kind of information about the volunteers, so forth and so on. How did they actually set this up? Well, what they did, they took an iPhone 6 earphone, okay, and then they attached it to a laptop. The laptop was running Windows 10, all that kind of stuff, what software they used, okay, and then how that particular measuring system was configured. Right? So they're saying we held the earphone below where the actual nose, okay, so it's not going through their mouth, it's going through the nose. We had them repeat the breathing gesture multiple times? Sticking point, how many times? Okay, did we have them do this 100 times, or did we have them do it 5 times? There's a big difference there. Okay, so that's the sort of thing that you should really point out. This experiment was repeated for 3 days, okay? Well, what exactly does that mean? Is that 3 consecutive days? Is that 3 days on 3 different days of the month? Okay, for how long during that day? Okay, was it at different times of the day? Was one of those days in the morning we're testing it, and then we're testing it in the evening on the next day, and then we wake you up in the middle of the night and test it again? All that stuff matters. Okay. Anyway, so in order to get some variance in the breathing patterns, they devised what they call contextual experiments. Okay, so those experiments were basically intended to change your breathing pattern to see if that changed the way that your breathing sounded. Okay, this was a pretty good idea, right? Really simple things like stretching your thoracic cavity, depending on if you're sitting or standing or lying down or whatever, that's going to change the way that you breathe. So we want to put people in different positions because that changes how your diaphragm, how your lungs work. That makes sense. Okay. Also, various different types of physical activity. Okay. So you're walking at a normal pace, going up and down the stairs. That's a little bit more rigorous. Okay. So you're going to be breathing. That's a little bit lighter here, a little heavier here. Okay. And then keeping the microphone at various distances. So they're throwing in a number of different variables and testing the system against those variables. Right. All of those things are going to change how you're breathing. Had to include characteristics on the breathing patterns. You know, all of this kind of stands to reason, I think, and I don't really know if that warrants mentioning. Okay, normal breathing gesture lies between 1.3 and 4.3 seconds. Deep breathing, they're still not really talking about what deep breathing means. They're just saying how long it lasts. Okay, so this kind of makes me uncomfortable. I think they should have been a little bit more specific. Okay, they're saying sniff breathing is found to be the shortest in length. Well, yeah, I hope so. I mean, most people can't sniff that deeply. Okay. They're saying that the spectrograms were different. Okay, with a sample size that small, how can we make sure that that's a robust authentication mechanism? All you're doing is really measuring audio, and audio is pretty easy. You know, it's easy to spoof in different ways. Okay, so if this is an authentication mechanism, it's pretty easy to record somebody making these noises. Okay, so if you can get a recording of somebody doing this, can you just play that recording back and break into the system? Simple replay attack. Could you have a situation where you have something like a voice actor and somebody just pretend or have attempt to emulate a certain breathing pattern, right? And with a sample size of 10 people, you can't really make any kind of claim about that, right? So again, the trial size that small, you can't reach any sort of conclusion with that. Something else with this, I don't know what any of this means. Okay, so I know that that's what a spectrogram looks like. What am I looking at? Like, is that how is it different? I mean, what do all of these colors mean, right? I have no idea. Okay. Also, if you're going to put this onto a slide, we need to at least be able to read the units that you're using. Okay, and right there we can't read that stuff. So it's okay to put these up here, but just make sure that when we're actually looking at this, we can read things like units and everything else. Okay, so they put this into the paper. Well, what's the context? I mean, is this about how much they look the same or how different they are, or or what? I don't understand. I don't know what I'm looking at, right? So you got to explain that kind of stuff. Okay. Critique here. The presenter made some pretty good points, I think, right? So how do things like age affect how you sound? What happens if you set this up to be your primary authentication mechanism and then you get a cold? Okay, you may not be able to get into your phone at that point. Okay, so that's all kind of good points to kind of include. Okay, then you got the inclusions, again, references. Guys, obviously, the actual paper itself is what you're going to reference, okay? But if you looked up anything online, it's not that big of a deal. Just put it in here somehow. Again, this is research. It's really important to cite all of this stuff. Okay. Last thing I'm going to cover is insect. Now, this was an interesting thing. I can't recall having ever seen somebody do something like this before. And it was a pretty neat idea that I'd like to see somebody follow up on. basically, this is a wearable olfactory display as an application, for mobile notifications. What does that mean? An olfactory display. Olfactory meaning related to the sense of smell. Okay. Display here, most of the time when we think about display, we're probably thinking about something we look at. Okay, but display, according to the dictionary definition, is a conspicuous demonstration. Okay, so it basically smells at you. Okay, the idea here was that you would have some kind of device, and you would basically wear this device around. Okay, and that would be connected to your cell phone. Okay, so we talked about unobtrusive interaction. Right? What's a way that we have unobtrusive interaction? We have things like vibrations, tones, lights, and everything else. And so the idea here is you would be walking around and you would just smell a certain scent, and that would correspond to some kind of event that you had on your cell phone. Okay. So contributions, the actual device itself. This is something that they had to build. Okay, which is not surprising because there isn't like a product on the market for this. They also had to develop the software framework, which they had scent notifications, which they called scentifications. Okay, and then they developed a little study to actually evaluate whether people like this thing, if that was something they could see themselves using, and so forth and so on. All right, so here's what we're doing. Here's how we tested it. There is kind of an interesting idea behind this. Your brain responds very strongly to smell. Okay? The reason for that, let's see, according to Psychology Today, incoming smells are first processed by the olfactory bulb, which starts inside the nose and runs along the bottom of the brain. The olfactory bulb has direct connections to two brain areas that are strongly implicated in emotion and memory. Okay? That being the amygdala and the hippocampus. You may have noticed that. You walk around, you see a certain smell, you see a certain smell, you smell a certain smell, okay? And that kind of takes you back to a certain time and place, right? We all know at our grandparents' house, don't we? Okay, so there's actually some solid science behind using this as a notification, okay? So this is something that we can kind of leverage. Now, they put this thing together. Obviously, this is a prototype. They kind of justified the prototype by saying, well, it looks like a piece of jewelry. And, I mean, I guess, but, you know, again, with miniaturization and everything else, you could potentially turn that into something that is relatively small. Right? The idea of using smell for HCI being what? Seriously, HCI, come on. Human-computer interaction. And the idea behind it, this has actually been around for quite a while. Okay, so the idea is, this is from Cornell in 2004. These people actually published several papers on this particular instance. Okay, the opportunities for odor experiences with smell and implications for technology. So this is something that's actually been that's a solid decade there. Okay, so this has been around for quite a while. You know, then of course trying to use something like mood to enhance, or excuse me, scent to enhance mood, that is obviously, you know, prolific. Okay. Interestingly enough, this is a device that actually exists. This is a device called Senti. This was just what you could potentially call a scentifier, right? So it's something you could plug into your phone. Okay, it would have the foundations for various odors here, and then that could be emitted from your phone. This was a Kickstarter project. I'm not completely sure if that actually went into production or not, but this is something that people have begun kind of playing around with. Now, obviously with that, that's not a real pragmatic thing to carry around with your phone, right? So the idea was to kind of take this idea and put it onto something you could actually wear. Okay. Now, the person who presented this particular paper was a computer engineering student, so he was very knowledgeable about hardware. I'm not particularly knowledgeable about hardware, okay, but they basically had to build this whole thing from scratch. Okay, so they had sync cartridges, okay, physically printed nanoboards. They were using Bluetooth Low Energy, okay. They had, you know, battery, that kind of thing, right? The final product looked about like this. actually put a colorized liquid in there so you can see how that was actually discharged when it was triggered by something. Okay, so that was blowing basically directly into your face. Okay. Again, not really gonna get into the cartridges and everything else, but this is how they built them. Okay, that's a good CAD descriptions and everything else. Okay. Basically what they had here, again, that's another blow up. They included a couple of different things, like with regards to the spray mechanism that they had, how loud that it actually was. They said it was only about 2.87 decibels, okay, which is only very slightly audible, because the idea, again, it's you smell something, you don't hear it. Okay. Described how they built the thing, right? Bluetooth, low energy, okay, not really related to Bluetooth, they just call it BLE. Got your sync cartridges, okay, and they had the cartridge basically was set up to between 7 and 100 syncophications, depending on the intensity. Right? They estimated that probably be used for several couple of days. Okay. They additionally had to develop the actual framework that would trigger the device, so they did that under Android. Included a couple of different ways you could configure it. So if you wanted to trigger a syncophication, you could trigger it based on who was sending you a message, the content of the message. I'm not really sure how they did that. Like, maybe the content has a smiley face or something in it. I'm not sure. I'll snip it up. Okay, a notification from a particular application. So if somebody, I guess, tweeted at you, and if it was Twitter that was sending you the notification, you could trigger it based on that. Timing conditions, what's on your timing is reminding you of a certain event, or you can have some kind of combination about all of these. Okay. How they tested this, 16 students, okay, ranging from 20 to 31 years old. Again, I know I'm getting nitpicky about the age, but that age is really important. Basically what they did is that the study began in an office room where the participant was shown what the thing was and how to use it. Okay. They used 4 scents in that particular study. They used flowers, mint, lavender, and linen. And then the users manually triggered the scent, okay, so that they basically had an association with what the thing was gonna smell like when they had certain events come in. Okay. After they configured the device, they put the wearable around their neck, and then they basically went out and kind of walked around campus. Okay, so they're trying this in an actual physical environment along with real people and everything else, right? So they wanted to kind of see how this worked in the real world. After all that, they basically gave a qualitative interview. When they say qualitative, what are they talking about? Qualitative. What's quantitative? Quantitative is dealing with measurable numbers. Okay, so with this, with the user experience, they couldn't really time the user or anything else, right? Give you any kind of a tangible sort of measurement. So this is all about qualitative. What did they think about it? What were the qualities of their experience? Okay. Now, something that was kind of interesting about that was that they gave this qualitative interview, and then in order to quantify the qualitative interview, what they did was they recorded the whole thing, they transcribed it into text files, and then they ran some data mining on the actual text files. Okay, so they took that qualitative interview and they turned it into quantitative feedback, right? Which is kind of interesting. I've never seen somebody do that. A couple of things people kept pointing out: fashion design is important. Well, yeah, it looks like you have a computer mouse around your neck. I can see how that would be kind of important. Okay. Something else they pointed out was that when the thing was smelling at them, they didn't want other people to be bothered by that. So that was something that they came. It's a very powerful odor. If you're standing in line at Starbucks, you don't want it, to smell on everybody. Okay. People tend to like it. Okay. So it kind of works subliminally. It's not something that really captures your attention immediately, but you do notice it. Okay. And so in terms of human-computer interaction, so they thought this was a kind of an interesting idea. Critiques, well, lackluster user experience study, again, you would like for that to be as robust as possible, okay? But given the circumstances, yeah, I think that's a valid critique. Unwieldy device, yeah, it's this honking big thing you have around your neck. It's really not gonna be something that you would like to use in practice. And then the same can potentially interfere with other users, okay? So, your conclusion here, and again, did a couple of different reviews, okay? So he actually went and read 2 different papers of about that, something to kind of keep in mind. A lot of times when you see, these papers, there will be a lot of different versions of the paper published, okay? So just be sure to kind of cite what you're using, okay? So, 3 presentations about 3, pretty interesting papers. I thought that they were interesting. Okay, so based on any of this, do you guys have questions about what the presentation looks like, what you should be covering, what you should be looking out for, and so forth and so on? Does that kind of give you a better idea of what this is all about? Okay. So, next week I'll set up my access point here in just a second for you guys to work on your labs. Next week, what I'm going to do is I'll bring in a couple of presentations just about the actual research